Hello and welcome to Phantom Fables TV. Don't forget to show your support by liking, commenting, subscribing, and turning on notifications. And just before we get into the story today, I just want to relay that 96% of all of my viewers are unsubscribed. Subscribing to this channel is absolutely 100% free. It costs you nothing. And if you end up not liking the content, then you can always unsubscribe. And I just want to give a quick thank you to everyone who has subscribed, who has liked, commented, yeah, and given me feedback. And a very special thank you to Miss Jennifer Spoon. Let's get in to today's story. I had just graduated from a 4-year university. I was now officially a wildlife biologist and landed my first internship with the state of Oregon. I had no idea what I would be doing, but all I knew was that I would be in the outdoors, and that's all that really mattered. The day after my graduation ceremony, I got on a plane and flew to Oregon. I grew up down in Texas, and while Texas is absolutely beautiful in some places, it can be not so beautiful in others. I instantly fell in love with the state of Oregon, the big tall mountains, the vast amount of evergreen trees, clear beautiful waters, and oceans. I was assigned to Yellow Falls National Park in Oregon. It was a massive park of over 9,000 acres of evergreen trees, clear streams, waterfalls. There's also a vast abundance of wildlife here: bears, cougars, deer, many different species of birds, and other small rodent like animals, such as rabbits, squirrels, and chipmunks. We had a fairly large variety of wildlife in Texas, but not nearly as much as they had in Oregon. I arrived at a small cabin near the ranger station. I went to meet with the manager of the park, a man named Otis Wilkinson. Otis walked around the main parts of the park and gave me a little bit of a tour. He brought me back to a cabin, told me to settle in. He further informed me that there were two other new graduate wildlife biologists that would be working on this project with me. And of course, if we did a good job and completed our tasks, we would each get a written letter of recommendation from the state of Oregon. This was a huge part of why I wanted to do this internship. It was extremely difficult to get a job without any kind of experience or recommendations. I settled myself into the cabin. It was probably a 1,400 square foot cabin with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, a modest kitchen, and an enclosed detached garage. I would have no problem calling this place my home for the next few days. Otis made an appearance into the cabin to make sure I was settled in, and he went on to inform me that over the next couple days, there were two other new graduate wildlife biologists who would be working with me on this internship. And we would further discuss the details of our tasks once all of the team members had arrived and settled themselves in as well. To say I was excited would be an understatement. I was in the middle of mountains and thousands of acres of beautiful clear water streams, abundance of wildlife, and tall, beautiful evergreen trees. And I had a couple days to just sit here and soak it all in. It was the first time I had gotten somewhat of a break since I graduated from college. I spent the next few days lounging around the cabin, fishing in the streams, and walking up and down the main trails, trying to familiarize myself with the park a little more and studying the map. It appears that on the outer northwest edge was all of the paved roads for people with campers, tents, RVs, everything, where people could have electricity and water and camp. The other 9,100 acres was pure, untouched, unscathed forest land. People frequently came here to hike through the 9,000 acres of woods. There were a few hills, but no major mountains or anything super difficult. But the main attraction was the river on the northwest end, near the camping resort. Not very many people embarked on the journey through the 9,000 acres of woods. The trail through the forest land was about 7 miles. It also appeared that every 2 miles there was an in ground water well where hikers and campers could refill their water. It was a beautiful park. There were not nearly as many nice necessities in any of the Texas parks. You were lucky if you got a paved road. I was sitting in the cabin and enjoying some alone time when Otis appeared through the front door, and standing next to him was another man, probably close to my age. Otis introduced me. David, I want you to meet Darren. He just graduated and became a wildlife biologist himself. He will be one of your crew members for your internship. Show him around and get him settled in. We're still waiting on one more person, and then we'll start preparing for your task, said David. I shook Darren's hand, and we got to know each other pretty well. We spent the next few hours sitting in the living room, talking about graduation, dreams of working in different areas. I could tell Darren and I would get along great. He also had lots of outdoor experience, like myself. As a kid growing up, he spent time hunting, fishing, and camping in the outdoors, so I felt confident that he would make a great hand when we were out in the outdoors together. We settled in for the night, and the next morning we awoke to Otis. He came inside our cabin yet again and introduced us to a woman named Eileen. Eileen had just recently graduated as well and was hoping to nail an internship so she could get a letter of recommendation. We quickly became acclimated with each other. Eileen did not have as much outdoor experience as Darren and I. She was more of a book smart person who knew everything about every living creature that you would find in the outdoors. Needless to say, we had a good mixture of street smarts and book smarts. I was fairly confident in this crew that we had assembled. Otis told us to meet in his cabin around lunchtime so we could go over what we needed to do to complete our internship and get our letter of recommendation. We assembled ourselves in Otis's cabin and sat ourselves in the living room, where he further explained our goals of this task. We were to march all the way through the forest, through all the main trails and side trails, and take counts of each type of species of animals. We could expect to see everything from birds, squirrels, deer, bears, cougars, bobcats, everything. And that we were to document how many we saw per square mile traveled and then average that across the entire forest, giving us an average population for each species per square mile. But little did we know we would come across one creature that none of us knew ever existed. This would be a multiple day journey through the woods. I was honestly kind of excited. I loved being outdoors. I loved seeing wildlife. I can't believe I would be doing this for a paycheck one day, and hopefully soon. We went out back to Otis's shed to be outfitted with all of our equipment. We were each issued a container for water, tents, sleeping bags, non-perishable foods, and were issued with several rifles to protect ourselves in case of emergency. After all, it was cougar mating season, and they can be very aggressive. Darren and I were outfitted with a lever-action 30-30 rifle and gave Eileen a 9mm pistol. To say she looked uncomfortable holding a firearm would be an understatement. She held it awkwardly in her hands, studying it. Otis raised a brow in concern and asked that we take her out to the shooting range to make sure she knows how to use it. Otis went on to explain that the main trails and areas that we will be traveling would be shut down for the week, hoping to give the wildlife time to come back into that area. We spent the following afternoon with Eileen at the gun range, getting her comfortable with the handgun and its functions. It didn't take long for her to grasp the basics of it and told her to keep her weapon on her and don't pull it unless absolutely necessary, because Darren and I would handle the shooting if needed. The rest of the afternoon was spent packing our things. We returned to the cabin for a good night's rest, hoping to get an early start the next morning. We awoke shortly before sunrise, hoping to get an early start on our task. Otis drove us to the entryway of the main trail and told us he would pick us up in a couple of days on the other end. He wished us luck and handed us each a radio in case we needed to signal him for help. Otis's truck disappeared into the horizon, and now it was just me, Darren, and Eileen. The orange sun was peeking over the treetops. It was time to get started. Darren was assigned to spotting animals that were further away with a set of binoculars, and I was tasked with finding animals close by, while Eileen kept documentation of everything. The early part of our trip, we spotted many species of birds, squirrels, and chipmunks. And after many miles of hiking, we started to see larger species of animals, including multiple species of deer, some skunks, and an occasional raccoon, holed up in a tree waiting for nighttime. It felt like we had just blinked and it was now lunchtime. We stopped around mile marker 2 and filled our water containers and had something to eat. And that's the first time I knew something wasn't right. A sound coming out from behind us. It sounded like a large bipedal animal barreling through a large set of trees just behind us off the main trail. I signaled to everyone to stop and listen. Then followed a period of silence, and the silence was then broken by a large tree crashing down to the forest floor. Whatever this thing was, it had to be huge, and I had no idea what it would be. My only guess would be a large bull moose, but those are fairly uncommon in the area. But a moose is definitely not bipedal, and what I heard most definitely was. I was hoping like hell it wasn't a large, pissed off bear. Against our better judgment, we decided to investigate, hoping to see whatever this was, and hoping it wasn't aggressive. We ventured just off the main trail to find a large evergreen tree, snapped about a foot off the ground. There was no reason for this tree to break. It was green. It was healthy. Moose are strong, but not strong enough to break a 4 foot diameter evergreen tree in half. Needless to say, I had no idea what the hell that was, but it was big, it was strong, and I had no intentions of running into it. There wasn't much discussion about the event that happened. We were hoping we didn't have to encounter whatever that thing was that did that. Little did we know, that encounter would change our lives forever. We continued down the trail and ran across a couple of bobcats, and off in the distance, on one of the large rocks, we saw a mountain lion. We had almost seen every native species of wild animal in Oregon already, and we were still on the first day of this adventure. We set up camp for the night while Eileen crunched the numbers, and it appeared that the average population density was higher than what the state of Oregon was reporting. These results were very pleasing to hear. The first day had went over without any flaws, except for that one unexplained event. We settled into our tents for the night, hoping to get an early start so we could wrap up the rest of the trip by sundown tomorrow. It couldn't have been later than 1 or 2 a.m. when Darren unzipped my tent in a panicked frenzy, waking me up. "Listen, man, whatever that thing is, it's back. Listen," Darren said with a panicked, hushed voice. And off in the distance I could hear it, a hushed, whooping noise, followed by several knocks. It was back. My blood ran cold, and my heart began beating out of my chest. Eileen was already awake, recording the whole thing on camera. And as we sat there, the noises grew closer and closer. So close, we were able to hear it moving again. It was the same creature from earlier that day. Eileen was nervously pacing around the campfire, with her hand on the camcorder and her hand resting on the pistol with the other. I could tell that she was scared. I would be lying if I said that Darren and I weren't either. "Let's move," I whispered. We packed up our things and started down the trail, trying to distance ourselves from whatever was making these noises. Since we heard them earlier in the day, whatever it was definitely following us. We started down the trail to distance ourselves, guided only by the illuminating light of the full moon, and hoping like hell it didn't hear us. But our worst fears came true. Walking at a brisk pace down the trail, every so often we would hear the whoop, followed by some more knocking. It was now 4 a.m. We had at least 2 more hours before sunrise, and now following the whooping sound and knocking, we could hear the footsteps again. Against our better judgment, we decided to pull out the spotlight to see what this thing was, to see what we were matched up against. And what I saw, I cannot explain. Through the thick brush and trees, I could see what looked like a face. The face had human-like features, but was covered in dark hair. We froze in our tracks. It almost looked like a large silverback gorilla, but it was much taller. It was at least 9 foot tall, and it was just standing there, watching us, not making a single sound. It was way too tall to be a gorilla, and way too tall to be a bear, and looked too much like a human. What the hell is that thing? We all stood on the trail, dumbstruck at what we were looking at. Neither us nor the creature were moving. Neither of us were making a sound. "It's time to go," I whispered, and we slowly started walking down the trail, trying to distance ourselves from whatever this thing was. I clutched my rifle in my hands, ready to fire, while Darren kept the spotlight on the animal, and Eileen guided us down the trail. After about walking 20 yards, this thing disappeared back into the woods out of view. Now all of us were running, running for our lives, running from whatever this thing was. As we were running, we could hear the animal running alongside us, just off into the brush, with an occasional whoop and knocking sound. And then on the other side of the trail, we heard more whooping and knocking sounds. There were multiple of these things. Whatever they were, there were more than one, and it was following us. No matter how fast we ran, it kept right up with us. I reached into my pocket to pull out the radio in a desperate attempt to get a hold of Otis. After several attempts of trying to reach Otis, I was now screaming into the radio, hoping that he would show up on the other side of this trail, even though we had 4 more miles to the end. Hoping if we could just make it to the other side, he could pick us up and get us the hell out of here. Otis questioned me on the radio, trying to figure out what was going on. I told him there was no time to explain, but we were being chased by some large animal, and we needed him to pick us up. Just meet us at the other side of the trail, I exclaimed. Otis finally acknowledged my message and said he would pick us up. Now all we had to do was make it to the other side. As we were running, the sounds grew closer and closer, and now large trees were crashing down across the trail, like whatever this thing was trying to stop us. After what seemed an eternity, we dropped all of our belongings, only keeping our spotlight and our guns, shedding the load, hoping it would make us run faster. Darren fired 3 rounds into the brush, hoping to scare these things away from us, just long enough that we could make an escape. But it did the exact opposite. It angered the animal. It was furious. It let out a hellish scream as trees started falling all over the trail. On top of having to run 4 miles to the other side, we were now having to hurdle over trees that were crashing down around us. We drew closer and closer to the end of the trail, and it sounded like the animal was getting closer and closer and more angry by the second. Then a sign appeared in front of us. We were a half-mile to the end of the trail. We were exhausted to say the least, but we knew we had to keep running. The creature was now 10 yards off the side of the trail, running parallel to us, on each side. No matter how fast we ran, it seemed to keep up with no effort. Through the brush and the trees, we could see the headlights of Otis's truck as trees continued to crash down around us. We finally reached the end of the trail and jumped into the back of Otis's truck and began slapping the side of the truck, telling him to go, when, all of a sudden, a large evergreen tree came crashing down, landing across the hood of Otis's truck. He threw it in reverse, desperately trying to get away. The small pickup truck struggled to remove itself from under the tree. Darren and I continued to fire a series of rounds in the direction of the animal before the pickup truck finally broke free from underneath the tree. And for a brief second, before we hauled ass out of that area, standing in front of me was a 9 foot tall ape-like creature, and there were multiple of them. They chased us maybe a quarter of a mile down the road before they finally gave up. The creature finally gave up. As we further distanced ourselves from the area, the faint sounds of the whooping and the knocks slowly faded away to nothing. We arrived back at our cabins, exhausted. It was now daytime. The following morning, Otis informed us that there had been several reports of these large ape-like creatures throughout the years that he's been here, but never thought anything of it. He always thought maybe some hikers' eyes were playing tricks on them, or it was a bear, but it most definitely wasn't. Otis was shocked by what he encountered, as were all of us. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Otis had written each of us a letter of recommendation on behalf of the state of Oregon. We got our letter of recommendation, and our trip was even considered a success. But to this day, I still listen for the whooping sounds and the knocking, hoping I never have to run in to whatever that thing was, and stay as far the hell away from the state of Oregon as possible.